Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy to welcome you today to our Admin and Ops podcast. We love talking about the work of ministry behind the scenes. We love talking to pastors and leaders and people who are doing admin and ops. And my special guest today is Matt Waldock. Welcome to the podcast, my friends.
Thank you very much. Really glad to be here, Gavin.
It's great to have him, and Matt's going to tell us a little bit about the church and gospel coaching. And before we jump into the session, I just wanted to stop for a couple of minutes just to say a big thank you to Church Suite, our sponsors of the podcast. We really appreciate the support that they've given to us as a church office to do this ministry. And if you've not heard of the Church Suite, then please type it into Google. Please have a little look at this piece of software that is designed especially for churches to help you do your organization, your administration behind the scenes with quality, with excellence. They have a brilliant spreadsheet, brilliant church database. There are so many different modules that will help you with child check-in, with planning your services, organizing your rotas. This will help improve your communication right across the church. So let me give a big shout out to them. Please check out their website and see whether that might be something you can connect with. Well, today's topic is jumping into Matt. Matt's leads a church in Manchester, and also you're head of running this kind of gospel coaching. Matt, fill us in. Tell us a little bit about the church first.
Yeah, so I'm one of the pastors at City Church Manchester. We have a co-pastor model, and we've been doing it for 10 years. So I moved to Manchester from Liverpool to help plant the church. We're right slap bang in the middle of the city, which is wonderful. All sorts happens. Our kind of running motto is it's never a dull Sunday, because literally anything can happen being in the centre of Manchester. But yeah, it's been 10 years of doing that. It's been really fun, incredibly hard work. Learning loads. But yeah, loving being in Manchester.
Yeah, it's great. And Matt and I have connected, and we've been chatting about gospel coaching and the church office and how we can partner together to serve men and women in ministry. And tell us a little bit about the kind of gospel coaching. And this is a passion for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So I guess the story behind Gospel Coaching UK was I was in a conference in America, and I was talking with another Brit pastor who was there, and he said, look, I'm not sure I would be still in ministry if it wasn't for my gospel coach. And I was like, well, what's a gospel coach? I've never heard of this term. You know, what do they do? How does that work? And he was explaining to me, and then he said, look, actually, as it turns out, at this conference, the guy who kind of set up gospel coaching in the US, this particular method of coaching Christian leaders, was here. Would you like to meet him? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. And so I met him, a great man called Dr. Tom Wood, who did his PhD on coaching and developing this method. And he was like, would you be interested in this being used in the UK? And I was like, I don't know. We've never had it. From what I've heard of it, from what you described, it sounds really great. And this was about 5 years ago. And so it was at a time when there was more and more stuff coming out about kind of Christian leaders dropping out of ministry, quitting, marriages breaking down. There was significant numbers of burnout, and that was becoming more and more aware, you know, in people's kind of minds as a real issue. And so I was thinking, yeah, we should explore this. And so he said, well, if you can get a number of network leaders in the room, I'll deliver the course to you and to them. And then afterwards, you can decide whether you think this would be something worth exploring in a UK context. So we did that, gathered those network leaders in the room. We did the course. Afterwards, we said, like, do we think this would work? And unanimously, they said, yes, this would be brilliant for us. And so we recognized that the material would need to be contextualized to the UK. We would need to do it differently to the American model in a number of different ways. But we thought, actually, if we could build gospel coaching into every healthy leadership ecosystem, the impact of that would be absolutely colossal for the gospel.
Yeah.
Men and women in ministry, their spouses, their families
Yeah.
thriving rather than just clinging on for as long as they can.
Yeah.
Wow, that would be brilliant. And so for the last 5 years, um, my role has been particularly to connect people up with coaches and to train leaders to become gospel coaches and to work with various different networks around the UK to see if gospel coaching could serve them, serve their network, serve the denominations.
Yeah. Great. And you've been using this as part of your team, and you've been seeing the fruit of this, I guess. You've been doing it for 5 years
Yeah.
to some extent. Yeah, give us a picture of the difference that is making. If you got some examples of leaders,
Yeah.
this has really turned it around for them.
So over the 5 years, we've trained about 106 different
Okay.
Christian leaders. 23 of them have been women, and we're in a process of actually seeing such an increased demand in women who are in ministry or women who have informal leadership roles.
Yeah.
Perhaps they're married to a pastor,
Yeah.
actually coming forwards and saying, actually, I'd love a coach
Yeah.
or I would love to be trained to be a coach. Um, about half of the staff team here at City Church of full-time staff members who've been through the coaching course itself. And already we've been able to see the difference that's made in terms of staff dynamics,
Yeah.
clarity of thinking, decision making, and I think the health of supervisions within the staff team, because actually we've got staff members now who are line managers who are now have a toolbox or a particular methodology to use when it comes to developing other members of staff and other leaders or volunteers within the church. So one of the big differences has been, I think, a staff team that feels happier and more productive.
Hmm.
And I think a massive difference has been a larger degree of confidence
Yeah.
in working with leaders, delegating, rather than feeling that it's just always easier to do it by myself because
Yeah.
it's just complicated to bring other people in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's just not a sustainable culture in any church.
Yeah.
And I think gospel coaching has been really useful to give people confidence to be more inclusive, more enabling of others, to be mobilized, which again contributes to healthier living, healthier rhythms, and hopefully less burnout. I think one of the big differences that I've seen with guys that I've been coaching is there is something really significant and sadly very rare in someone else uh, being present with you as you articulate what's going on in your life and ministry. Um,
Yeah.
and the key thing with coaching is you've got someone who's outside of your situation.
Yeah.
They don't know the people that you're talking about. Um, they've got no skin in the game of your
Yeah.
ministry other than to see you thrive.
Yeah.
Which means you've got a coachee for the first time who can actually share what's going on,
Mhm.
actually talk about the challenges that they're facing, not having to worry that it'll get back to someone.
Yeah.
Because much of the things that I think a leader faces, it's just not appropriate
Yeah.
to share.
Yeah.
Even it's very difficult to share it with other eldership teams or leadership teams because many of the biggest challenges are in those teams.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
often a lot of leaders, they carry these burdens by themselves, and the only person that they get to talk it to is is a spouse.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if the only person that you are able to bounce ministry ideas off with is a spouse, or if the only person you're able to debrief the challenges of ministry with is your spouse,
Mm. Mm.
I think that leads to uh, I think it leads to ill health within the marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think it creates an echo chamber which doesn't enhance clarity in decision making, but actually can diminish it.
Yeah.
Um, and the ability, I think, for a leader to talk to a coach and have someone who's going to ask them the questions that nobody else will
Mhm. Yeah.
has just been really, really refreshing and really, really valuable. And so there's some of the impacts that
Yeah.
I've seen just in
Yeah.
a short time that coaching's been in the UK.
And it's great, isn't it? And I think we're both aware of scenarios, aren't we, where leaders are pastoring on their own, and you can see the need and the huge benefit there is for someone to be able to process things outside of,
Yeah,
well, there is no one else to process. You're right, outside of just a spouse, and then the complications of working with others as you grow a team or grow an eldership,
yeah,
grow a staff team. You're right. It's hard to be honest sometimes, and to have a peer that you can sit alongside and go, this is where I'm struggling. These are the decisions that I've got to work through. I
yeah.
haven't a clue. I need some processing space,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and mate, so it's hugely valuable. And I know leaders that have gone through the process with you that would share the same kind of things that you're saying there. The huge benefits for them as an individual, but also their effectiveness to do gospel ministry
Yeah,
because they are being well cared for, being given the time and the space to do that,
yeah.
which is great.
The
If
thing,
someone's Go on, Matt.
the thing that I'm seeing that is killing leaders out there is the unreasonable expectations
Okay.
that are either being placed on them or they perceive it
Yes.
is being placed on them.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the information age has provided loads of wonderful tools, loads of great benefit, loads of great access to resources that otherwise you just wouldn't be able to get your hands on. So, very thankful to the Lord for many of those blessings. One of the downsides, though, of the age that we live in is the expectations and comparisons that congregations have with their pastors, with
Hmm.
their favorite online preacher across the world,
Yeah.
or the way they perceive their favorite
Yeah.
online preachers across the world, has a real kind of on the ground impact.
Yeah.
Because I think
Yeah.
um, leaders, pastors these days, you have to be an outstanding communicator.
Hmm.
That's the expectation. And many of our people are listening to a number of the world's best Bible teachers in the world before they even come to listen to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to be an outstanding visionary. You have to be a wonderful cultural kind of on the pulse reader. You have to be a phenomenal counselor. It's not enough to pray with someone in their time of suffering. The expectation is you're going to ask questions that will unearth from their childhood, what the deep trauma was.
Yeah.
You have to be the person who can build teams.
Yeah.
You have to be the person who can build systems. You have to be now an able CEO of a small charity, most
Yeah.
of us, and the
Yeah.
complexities of that.
Yeah.
And you have to have the expectation that you're going to be available whenever people need you. Now, all of those expectations on any one individual are impossible.
Mm.
You try and do all of those things, you're going to crash, you're going to burn out, you're going to disappoint. Um, it, but actually, simply just saying kind of, well, I shouldn't have to be all of those things is rarely sufficient
Yeah.
because there is this dichotomy between what we know to be true, but what we feel to be true.
Hmm. Hmm.
And actually, it's feeling those things within, it's kind of absorbing some of those expectations and not having anyone to process that with,
Mm.
that I think is a significant contribution to why many leaders in ministry are miserable and many feel like they're on the verge of burning
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. It is, and it's almost kind of like expected, isn't it, that you go into ministry and there's a kind of martyr complex that you are going to experience this, and this is just what life is like. This is a decision to go into ministry, and it's nuts, isn't it, to think that is the case, that we can't find life and joy and real fulfillment in what God's called us to do,
Yeah.
and how we work with others. It is a challenge, isn't it? And I think you're right. The need is out there. The need is out there. But for someone listening, Matt, to the first time, and they go, a gospel coach, what is coaching? Maybe you're in an older generation that hasn't come across this kind of term, and you're thinking, oh well, this is just a worldly, they got coaches in businesses and CEOs are coaches,
Mm.
and now we're going to bring it into the church as pastors.
Yeah.
Uh, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're spot on that one, Gavin. I hear that all the time.
I'm sure.
Gospel coaching, though, is different from business coaching or life coaching. In the sense, it is an intentional conversation that seeks to apply the gospel
Mhm.
to a leader's relational life, personal life, missional life, and devotional life. They're all four of those spheres are deeply interconnected. And the fundamental role of a coach is to help leaders to apply the gospel to themselves
Yeah.
so that they might thrive, so that ultimately they might have clarity. Um, and that clarity enables them to make better and wiser, healthier decisions for their families, for themselves,
Mm.
and of course for the churches that they lead. I think in leadership, the one thing that you need is perspective.
Yeah.
And the first thing that goes out the window when you hit crisis is
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
And we are trained, and I imagine most of us are very capable at applying the gospel to others.
Mm.
But I think most of us, and I'm talking to myself on this, we're
Yeah.
pretty rubbish at applying it to ourselves.
Yeah. That's right.
And actually, it is that opportunity again of someone outside of your situation who's got no skin in the game of
Mm.
your ministry, apart from their heart is to see you thrive, asking you questions about your motivation for this and your motivation for that makes all the difference. Let me give you an example of that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do it.
I never thought I struggled with anxiety as
Hmm.
a leader because I don't struggle with panic attacks.
Hmm.
I thought anxiety was something that other people um, other people struggled with. But actually, I started to get chronic back pain during um, COVID.
Mm.
And I struggled all my life with a degree of back pain, but nothing quite like this. So I went
Mm.
to a physio and he looked me over and said, look, there's really nothing wrong with you. And so that set me on a kind of pathway of thinking, well, I wonder if there is some
Mm.
things going on in my mind
Yeah.
that are actually manifesting themselves physically. And I started to unravel that a little bit and realize that actually my anxiety manifests itself when I get anxious, it manifests itself in three particular ways in my role at church. Number one, I get disproportionately involved in a pastoral situation.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
I get really stuck in, I get overly involved.
Yeah.
Number two, I start micromanaging
Yeah. Yeah.
my staff and volunteer leaders. And thirdly, I try and find a really big project in the life of the church to throw myself into.
Yeah.
But the issue is, all
Yeah.
three of those things I am set apart to do.
Yeah.
And if you were looking at me from the outside as a member of my congregation, or even a member of my eldership team, you would look at me and think, well, he's just doing his job.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
some senses, I am. But at my heart, behind those three things was not for the love of the Lord, not for the love of those I was serving, but to try and help me regain control
Yeah.
and feel valued
Yeah.
and boost my identity through achievement. Um, and actually, what a
Yeah.
coach is able to do, and I have a coach, and my coach is a guy called Dudley, who is a retired minister who's just been brilliant.
Mm.
What a coach enables me to do is actually look at some of these good things on the surface that I am doing and
Mm.
recognize that the heart behind them
Yes.
is a combination of fear, idolatry, and certainly not applying the gospel to myself
Yeah.
in key areas. And so that kind of does that kind of give a sense of
Yeah,
how
that does.
gospel
It
coaching
does.
kind of features on that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good example. And the anxiety is something that will definitely land with lots of listeners who, who would be in those kind of roles. Um, but with that, Matt, do you think you've developed then the skills of that kind of people talk about, self-awareness and understanding your weaknesses and kind of not necessarily just embracing them, but being aware of them and then applying the gospel to those. Has that been part of the process for you as well?
Yeah, it's been a massive process because I think if you're honest as a leader, you have blind spots.
Hmm.
And I think there's a real truth that your strengths in leadership are also directly linked to some of your biggest weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Most of the leaders that I know have who have quit ministry or lost their positions of responsibility, been asked to step down, is not because they went theologically loose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's because actually they didn't pay attention to the blind spots they had,
yeah,
and that led them into situations where relationships fell apart, and
yeah,
they made unwise choices in the midst of that.
yeah.
And I think we can be foolish in making the gospel a
Mm,
bit of a shorthand. Oh, it's just I just need to rely on a gospel identity. I just need to rely on Jesus a bit more, which is all true.
yeah.
But we can say those things in a very blasé or reductionistic manner that don't actually look at what does that really look like in the context of my life?
Yeah,
In what way in my marriage am I clearly not trusting in the finished work of Christ?
yeah,
In
yeah,
what way does my kind of hours that I work or the responses in my heart to criticism belie the fact that there are areas of the gospel that I can articulate with theological accuracy,
mm,
but actually I'm not deeply applying to the very affections of my being.
yeah,
And it's in those gaps that we really need to apply
mm,
the gospel with
mm,
precision
yeah,
rather than with a Christian platitude.
yeah,
And again, that type of work is incredibly difficult to do on your own.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
we're all biased
yeah,
not
yeah.
to,
Yes.
which is why having someone who will sit along with you over a period of time, get to know you, and again, ask you the questions that nobody else will makes all the difference. And so when it comes to leadership support that I'm seeing right across the UK, most networks and denominations will have a value for supporting leaders,
Yeah,
particularly leaders who are struggling. But what that mechanism largely looks like is a senior person will fly in and have a coffee with you
yeah,
for maybe 1.5 to 2 hours. And it'll be a great coffee. It'll be a great conversation. It'll be really helpful, but you may not see them again for
yeah,
another 6 months or year or whatever. Not
yeah,
because they don't want to do that, but because actually resources are really stretched.
yeah.
What what a coaching relationship enables you to do is to have someone who's going to meet up with you every 3 to 4 weeks for about an hour, typically online, who is getting to know you, getting
Mm,
to know your rhythms, getting to know your patterns, getting to know the challenges that you're seeing. And it may not be until the third or fourth session your coach is able to say to you, can I stop you there and just share some of the things that I'm observing?
yeah, yeah.
Because I think in a coaching conversation, I think this is largely true of any pastoral conversations. There's almost three categories. There is the things that there's the things that you want to talk about. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Um, there's the things that you want to talk about, and you're happy to share because they're not particularly embarrassing.
Yeah.
Then there are the things that you are aware of that you don't want to talk about because they are very embarrassing.
Mhm.
And then you've got the issue of things that you have in your mind that you're not even aware of
Mm,
that are causing havoc.
yeah,
If you don't have an ongoing conversation over a period of time, over a period of weeks and months, you'll only really sit in the first category
yeah,
of sharing the things that you're comfortable with sharing.
yeah,
It's trust,
yeah,
it's time that allows you to get to the deeper second and third levels.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that's one of the things that a coaching relationship that lasts a period of time can benefit a leader with.
yeah. That's helpful. I think it's really resonated with me when you're saying about when you're struggling, you get somebody flies in for a coffee and conversation, and then so many leaders I've met that's obviously the first step, and then it's the offer of of some time off, or it's a leading conversation into a sabbatical, and you're right. These are all crisis things that we quickly can apply. But you're right, you're talking here about a kind of an ongoing relationship, aren't you? That really, someone who's with you on that journey to help you thrive in your role. And for people who are listening to this podcast, are part of teams, and you're thinking, well, I'm the senior pastor, I do that for my team. The reality is you probably aren't doing some of that for your team because of the nature of the work, the nature of the business that we do when we serve people in the church and we shepherd in people.
Yeah.
Constantly, aren't we being called upon? We're constantly working with sheep and teaching and carry that responsibility that we don't always think about the needs of our team in the best way. And I think there's some reality checks there, aren't there, to go, actually, I think I'm doing this for my team. Actually, you might not be.
I think Gavin, you're absolutely right. And I think there's a real need to be honest. I think for those of us who have the privilege of supervising other people on our teams, formally or informally, whether they're paid staff or volunteers, that when you combine kind of job targets, job objectives, all of the HR thing, all of the contractual things that are behind the scenes, it's very difficult either for the person that you're coaching or supervising to be absolutely honest with you, particularly if some of the things that they could share may impact how their line manager, pastor will see them. And it's very difficult as well if you are the supervisor or line manager to ask certain questions because it just becomes very messy. If there is kind of an employer-employee dynamic. So I'll give you an example of one of the benefits of a coaching relationship is someone might say, look, we have 5 small groups in our church. They function really, really well. We've seen real growth in the church. We think that's going to continue. We want to launch 15 more small groups by the end of the year. And a coach may well be able to help that person move towards that. But the first question a coach is going to have is, well, why do you want to do that? What's the heart behind that? Is it because actually structurally that's the best way to serve the church, or is it because actually that many small groups or a multiplication in your ministry will make you look good? And you've always wanted to be involved in big church, and here we are. What's actually going on behind the scenes? It's one of the advantages of, again, they don't have skin in the game of your ministry. Their priority is to see you thrive. And particularly when someone's saying, look, I've got a brilliant idea. This would make a massive difference to the church. We could run this on a Thursday evening, and it's a brilliant outreach opportunity. And the coach will say, well, yeah, there's loads of opportunity there. And it might have real wins that you could go for. But you have told me over the last few sessions that you're already out 3-4 nights a week. That you feel like your marriage is being held together on a shoestring. Really? Is this new idea going to be the best fit for that? However good it might be for the wider ministry of the church. That's a hard conversation, I think, to have in an internal supervisory relationship.
That's great, isn't it? And these things we're chatting about, link into capacity, don't they? The church's capacity, our own individual capacity, and the example there of the small group thing and turning that into 15 more. If you're on your own in that space as a pastor, without anyone to kind of throw that around with and to think about motivations, to think about how we're going to do this, I can imagine so many mistakes being made with that happening, with the wrong leaders being appointed, with the wrong dynamics in the group not being thought through, with not having the time to put in the planning of what are we actually going to do in these groups, what's the purpose of these groups. Suddenly it kind of unravels a bit, doesn't it? And you've got a greater kind of crisis on your hands that now you feel like you're a failure, and now you're like, well, I'm ready to give up ministry. I never want to do small groups ever again. It kind of untangles like that, doesn't
That's
it?
right.
Quickly.
That's
um,
right.
so you know what you're suggesting there is great. Um, let's do a couple of words then to people who are employing others, and we chatted a little bit about this privately over the last couple of months, haven't we? Of when you
Mm.
call a pastor to the church and you're sorting out contracts and you're trying to give the best you can, but you're also trying to manage what the church
Yeah.
is able to offer. And we've had conversations on this, haven't we? That actually what we're identifying here is that leaders need support with marriage, potentially. They need support with their kids and family life. They need an outlet or some kind of outside support with some
Yeah.
coaching. um we obviously we're going to have a conversation about pay, and we want to pay our leaders well and
Yeah.
those kind of things,
Yeah.
but at the point we hire, if we could think through some of these things, Matt, what would you be recommending to
Yeah.
elders who are thinking, right, I'm going to call someone into a role?
Yeah. Vital question. Vital question. I think if you're an elder or on an eldership team and you're in the process of thinking, okay, we're looking to call our next senior pastor or next minister or next key worker that we want to bring in, um, you want to be asking the question, how do we set them up to thrive,
Yeah,
not just through the induction period of the
yeah,
first few months, but we want this to last potentially for years.
yeah,
And we don't want them to kind of have a brilliant start and then burn out.
yeah,
We certainly don't want a situation where they work really hard and then they're off sick
yeah,
because they overworked for months and the
yeah,
complications of that. And we certainly don't want them to be in a situation where their family falls apart
yeah,
for whatever reason. And it's tragedy for them, their families, but you're also back in the same
yeah,
place where you're picking up the pieces amongst your
yeah,
church family and having to reappoint again.
yeah,
And I think with that in mind, I would really encourage them to want to build into contracts and agreements and budget lines um, a coaching support.
yeah,
I'd love them to be having conversations with the candidate they're bringing in to say, if you're successful, we have money set aside for you to get a coach,
yeah,
and even
yeah,
for your wife
yeah,
to get a coach.
yeah,
I think it's either number one or number two
yeah,
reasons why men are leaving ministry early is because their wives are unhappy,
yeah,
and because their wives are unsupported.
yeah,
So again, I think there's a naivety in elderships if we think just by supporting the guy,
yeah,
we're doing all that we can.
yes,
Actually, we have to see, the role and responsibility that we have of supporting family units or marital units as a whole.
yeah,
If we want to see people thrive, and a
yeah,
pastor who's thriving in their personal life, devotional life, family life, marital life, is a pastor who's going to be in the healthiest position to serve the church and congregation.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely right. And I think at that point of entry, there's so much discussion to have, isn't there? To think about. Yes, we want our contracts to reflect how we can care for them, but also for them to understand what are some of the weaknesses, what are some of the anxieties that somebody may be coming in with. What experience do people have of managing people? How do they feel about that when they begin to do some of these roles? Because you may be calling somebody from a theological college who doesn't have some of those
Yes.
experience, that actually, are they the right fit? And we need to be kind of and likewise, I think, going the other way, I know so many people who go to churches who preach with a view, and they're purely judged on their preaching ability
Yeah.
to the majority of the extent that you're like, this is nuts, because they need to understand how you guys make decisions. They need
Yeah.
access to your budget and the culture and the way that you work, because are they the right fit? And we're getting into a wider, broader thing, but all of this is so important, isn't it?
Oh, it
Because
really is.
yeah,
And
it's
I think
massive.
there's a real lack of wisdom of thinking that when someone comes out of seminary
Yeah,
or when someone comes out of their first kind of church position, to your,
Yeah.
as a kind of next step up, that they are the finished product.
Yeah.
Actually, the complexity and the significance and the importance of the role of being a minister of the gospel requires ongoing investment, ongoing development, ongoing care and shaping. Society doesn't stop shifting and
Yeah.
changing. The complexities of life don't slow down, they
Yeah.
just speed up.
Yeah.
And actually, giving them the tools of a coach, a support outside of the church can make a massive, massive difference.
Mm.
It often breaks my heart to hear stories of churches where there is a relationship breakdown,
Mm.
either within the staff team or between um, members of the staff team and the eldership.
Mm.
Because when there's a breakdown of relationship with leadership teams, they are the most painful and most damaging
Yeah.
kind of relational breakdowns that you can have in the church.
Yeah.
But it often makes me think, in a kind of imagined sense, you know, I'm talking to someone who's really upset. They're broken by a relationship breakdown on their eldership or on their staff team with a member of staff. And it makes me think back, but yes, but there was a time when you interviewed that person, you sat down with them, you were
Yeah.
so excited for them to
Yeah.
join you and to come onto the team,
Yeah.
and you were so optimistic about how this would turn out.
Yeah.
You know, oh, what has gone wrong? Isn't it an absolute tragedy? If only there were some things that you could have done early on when everything was great
Yeah.
that would have helped with this situation. Maybe in the long run, it wouldn't have made any difference. But I think if there are some things in hindsight that you could have done to
Mm.
increase the likelihood this would have gone well, um, wouldn't you want to do it? And of course, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And I think there are things you
Yes.
can do, as you've
Yeah.
said. You can be really deliberate in thinking about, well, how do we set people up well with contracts and the
Yeah.
things that we put in them to
Yeah.
increase the likelihood that things will go
Yeah.
well? There's often a naivety, I think, within churches that because we're all Christians,
Hmm. Hmm.
sin won't affect our relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we get totally rolled over by that.
Yeah.
Um,
It
yeah,
surprises us. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Front loading some of the
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
on making sure that the relationships can be as healthy as possible, I
Yeah.
think is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not a negative. People might see it as a negative thing, or why are we, putting in these
Yeah,
additional options front loaded, but actually they do, not only do they save the church money later because of the, people being off sick and leaving with stress, but actually it's a great huge investment for,
yeah,
supporting, leaders to serve long term into ministry, and that's
yeah,
what we want to see, isn't it? And that's where churches flourish, where there's
yeah,
long-term, stable leadership. It has a gospel impact, which is what we're about. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Matt,
I mean,
this is great, and fill me in on how someone can connect with you now, because I think the need is there. We see it, and I hope people are going. I need to go away and put this in the budget. I need to go away
yeah,
and speak to some people. And if you're in admin and ops and you help facilitate budgets and training, don't be put off when someone comes and says, I'd like to explore the option of getting a coach. What can we do as admin and ops staff behind the scenes to enable this to happen? You may look on your pastor thinking, they're fine. They've got everything together. They may not. And so what part can we play in supporting people? But Matt, how do they connect to you, and what does that look like? What are the costs and things like that?
yeah. So I guess a couple of things just to say in terms of connection. Um, The first thing is, if you would like a coach, you can contact me at matt@cmmnet.org. And basically, what that looks like is I'll connect with you, get to know you a little bit, get to know
Right.
your context, and seek to find a coach that would be a good fit for you. Someone who's been trained through the gospel coaching method. We've got quite a rigorous process of training, development, and evaluation for that. So
Great.
when I recommend someone to you, you kind of know what you're getting,
Yeah.
which is, I think, important. And I think it's also significant to say that, You don't have to be the senior pastor to think,
Hmm.
oh,
Hmm.
I should get a coach.
Yeah.
I think you could be on any position on a staff team or in a lay eldership position, uh, and you are carrying leadership weight, burden, and responsibility
Yeah.
that requires you to flourish.
Yeah.
And a coach could be really valuable to you. I think the second thing that I would say is we train people to be coaches.
Hmm. Mm.
Um, and that largely kind of falls into two groups. There are those who do what we have as a 3-day foundations training.
Hmm.
And that's in person where we go through the gospel coach training model. We go through the theological underpinnings. We go through the theoretical practice, and we do lots of practice sessions
Yeah.
to get you confident in these new skills that you're walking away with. And some people do that with no intention actually of coaching beyond
Okay.
that, but just from the perspective of they have responsibility of working with leaders and developing
Yeah.
leaders, volunteers, or on staff, and
Yeah.
they've never been trained how to do it.
Yeah.
They've never been trained how to ask good questions. They've never been trained how to structure a supervision session. They've never been trained how to move people forwards towards objectives
Mm.
using kind of smarter strategies. And actually, what this course does is it skills you up to do what you're doing,
Yeah.
hopefully more effectively and with greater confidence. But then there's a second group who will do the foundations training, and um, they will do the training. They're probably people who are already investing in leaders within their church, but probably externally to their church, maybe in their network, maybe in their denomination. But they've never really had, again, a particular methodology for doing it.
Yeah.
And what Gospel Coaching Foundations will do is it will sharpen you up on things that you're already doing, probably help you understand, oh, there's a name for that. There's a name for that. Oh, there's a particular technique for that. But it will also give you a whole set of tools that you're probably not using that will help you be more rounded in your coaching and development of others. I guess from a financial standpoint, we encourage people to pay a coaching fee for the
Yeah.
coaches that they get.
Yeah.
Um, but in that sense as well, we never want money to be an obstacle for someone not to have a coach. And there are a whole bunch of trained coaches who are happy to coach for free. And
Yeah.
so we can make sure that people are linked up as appropriately. The course that we're doing, the foundations course, we've got one coming up in January, the end of January in Manchester. I don't know when this podcast is going to air. But we do a foundations course. It costs around about £389, but that includes the 3 days training, all the materials,
Yeah.
6 online practice sessions afterwards,
Yeah.
and a personalized 360 evaluation.
Yeah.
So I think it's a,
That's good
it's a pretty
value.
good
That's
price.
huge good
It's a
value.
good
Yeah.
price for what you
Yeah.
get.
Yeah. That is excellent. Yeah. We'll make sure this podcast goes out before that date in January. And obviously people can link into your website to check out what gospel coaching in more detail is. And I know you've written some articles and there's some things in there that will
Yeah.
draw people into that. So I've always planned to try and get onto this foundations course, mate, and it
You'd be
will be
very welcome.
I am going to be there, and I don't know if it'll be Manchester or whether we'll chat to you about doing one sort of closer to home,
Yeah,
South
absolutely.
Wales, because
Absolutely.
there's a bunch of people that I think would be interested here. So
Yeah, yeah.
so people have got your contact details to get involved. Well, a big thank you to Matt to coming on the podcast and fitting us in and just opening up this whole area for leaders for our consideration. And if you do have any questions that you'd like to follow up with, then please get in touch. questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We would love to connect you with Matt. We'd love to chat to you more about this. If you're hearing this in an admin and ops role, then there are some things that we can learn from this as we supervise staff. And again, the foundations course might be something that we may want to look at this year. And I know this is a kind of year, we get to the end of the year, it's quite reflective, and we start thinking about next year, and maybe putting on one of these training courses onto your training calendar would be something that would be a good outcome from today. So thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to the podcast. And if there's anything that we can do as a church office to better support you in your administration, in your operations, to serve your church, but ultimately to serve the gospel, then please get in contact. We'd love to hear from you. Matt, thanks for joining us today. And
pleasure, absolute pleasure. Love what you're doing, Gavin, and thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you. And we'll see you next time on the podcast. All right. Thanks, guys.